and welcome back to When Life Feels Messy. I'm one of your wonderful hosts, Erin Raspberry.
Hello, and I'm Ashley Rera, your other wonderful host.
And we are super excited for episode 3 of the series with Dr. Ramira Saavedra. We are finishing up the series on eating disorder and disordered eating. And so if you haven't listened to our first and second episode, please go do that before you listen to this one, just because it's a good continuation of everything that we've covered. But Ramiro, will you give another short intro to our listeners about yourself?
Yes, my name is Ramiro. I'm faculty here at TWU, and I teach an eating disorder class as well as working with our dietetic interns every year. Those are students who are in a master's program or higher, and they are training to become registered dietitians. And I am a registered dietitian myself by background.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to jump right in because we have good information to cover again.
All right. Yes. So let's start with the social media influence and eating.
Yeah, so that is such a good topic because, I have my students read a book called The Golden Cage by Hilda Bruck. And it's a book that was written in the 70s by a doctor from Baylor College of Medicine right down the street. Oh, wow. And it was renewed again in 2001 for a second edition. And it's kind of stopped there. And although the book is more than 20 years old, or actually more than 40 or 50 years old, some of the cases that they read in the book are still very much what happens today with disordered eating. And a lot of the questions I ask them relate to the stories being told in the book, but also asking them, to apply the things that they learned in class. But one of the things I ask them is, hey, so this book was written in 1970 something, and then, second edition in 2001. But what has changed, right, since from then to now? And surprisingly, a lot of students mentioned, well, a lot of the things with the characters and their stories are the same, but XYZ has changed. And one of the things they always mention is social media.
Yes.
And back then, right, when we were fed ideals of body and we were fed distortions about those things, they came from TV ads or television or maybe even the radio, right? And then today, it's 2025, a lot of it is coming from the consumption of social media. So we have a whole chapter that we cover on social media and that we discuss every piece of social media, every type of video that's out there, and type of content. Obviously, the number one red flag type of content is pro-eating disorder accounts or websites that try to mask themselves as healthy eating. But it's really not. What it really is, and back in the early 90s and 2000s, there was, what we called pro-ana websites or pro-anorexia websites where people would actually post pictures of themselves, in bikinis, very, very thin, and they would tell people there was guides on these websites of how to get that skinny. And so they were sharing information on basically how to encourage the eating disorder. And they were completely skipping around the fact that they have an eating disorder. Some of them were very forward with it, and they were just saying, this is what I do, to be skinny. And then, so it was a lot of that. There was a lot of bulimia websites, but today there's so many websites out. There are some websites and still some social media accounts that are very much pro-anorexia, pro-bulimia, pro-eating disorder. But what's hiding behind the surface of it all is there is a lot of information on how to eat and how to do it. And again, some of it is very much geared towards a specific audience. Some of it is geared towards everyone. And so what are some of these things? And I'm going to go over them as topics, right?
Okay.
So one of the things is what I eat in a day, right? And they're very harmless, right? To most people, you just kind of scroll through it and you see what people are eating and you're like, oh, cool. Maybe I want to try this. But someone who's struggling with disordered eating or who has an active eating disorder may take it much more prescriptive, right? Mm-hmm. And then that comparison starts of, here's what I'm eating, here's what they're eating. Maybe I should do more of this. Maybe I should eat less of that. And then there's this body comparison too, right? There's videos that are me after a bulk or me after a shred, right? And so a lot of these are male content creators, but it could be anybody. And what the dangerous piece of that is that it encourages body comparison. When we know that bodies look a certain way because of genetics, because of social influences, because of, could be chronic illnesses that people have, and just the fact that everybody's body composition and distribution of body fat just differs, right?
Yeah.
Across many factors, right? Hormones, biological sex, I mean, you name it. There's lots of things that determine what your body looks like, but it creates this unhealthy comparison. And to most people, it's fine. But when someone's struggling with disordered eating, those can be things that begin to feed that comparison, and then they begin to feel very anxious about not looking that way. And then trying the things in the video and still not looking that way, right? There's also videos, they started in certain countries in Asia, but they're called like mukbang videos.
Yes, that's what came to mind.
Yes, and so these are videos where people will eat large amounts of food on camera for the purpose of just entertainment, right? And it's really kind of scary that like they're able to eat that much in one sitting, right? And they do it obviously for the views. There are even viewers or content creators whose whole life is centered around these videos, and they get a lot of views from it. And what they'll do is they'll, sit down and eat anywhere from 5 to 15,000 calories in one sitting. So, 5 or 6 ramen soups, 6 pizzas, 5 burgers, 5 fries, 2 sodas, or a whole 2-liter soda. And none of those foods are bad. None of the foods are things that people can't have. Of course you can have them unless you have an allergy or something. But the way that they're doing it almost, gives people the okay to say, hey, binging behavior is okay.
Exactly.
Or binging behavior is totally acceptable, if you want to do it for views. And there have been a lot of people who started doing these videos for views and ended up with a full-blown eating disorder as a result, because then they also ended up gaining weight and they also ended up doing all these other things. And there's also a lot of these content creators who make the videos, eat all that, but then after the video's done, they purge it all.
Oh,
right?
gosh.
So there's that part of it they don't talk about, right? Because a lot of them are able to maintain a healthy body weight. And it's like, well, how do you do that with 10,000, 15,000 calories that you're eating? So that's another type of video to watch out for that could be a trigger if you are suffering with disordered eating or you have an active diagnosed eating disorder. Another one is these, fit me, or like, I'm a fitness influencer and this is what I'm doing and this is what I eat, and in videos that emphasize like clean eating, because they don't talk about the opposite of that, but the opposite of that is an unspoken idea of if you're not eating clean, then you're eating dirty, right? And now we've moralized food again, right? There's a bad and there's a good, there's a clean and there's a dirty, right? And that's another piece that people, again, after watching content over and over, because, they start watching it and then it gives them another video and then it gives them another video, and now it's part of their algorithm, right? And another thing a lot of my students brought up, which I was surprised that they were so in tune with it, but I guess they would be. They consume a lot of social media. A lot of people do. But it's the algorithm, right? After a while, your algorithm will begin to start showing you fitness videos, diet videos, weight loss videos, body fat comparison videos. And even some of those can be a bit triggering where, oh, look, this is me 20 pounds ago, this is me now. And that's very common right now because a lot of people want to celebrate their weight loss successes, especially with GLP-1s and other weight loss drugs. People are trying to kind of celebrate that. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you're looking at it from the lens that we are, as clinicians, one of the things that, comes to mind is the fact that, one, not everybody can afford that, and two, there's this idea that, like, well, as long as you take the medicine, like, everything's fine. And there's also this idea of, like, this is what you need to do to control weight. And the reality is that it's different for everybody. Treatment is always individualized. And so there's those videos, too. There's also videos on, there's a lot of videos targeting men, a lot of videos targeting young men, especially those that compete in performative or competitive sports where weight is required, right? So there's a lot of wrestler videos. There's a lot of MMA, because that's very popular right now. MMA and boxing and any type of mixed martial arts where they're cutting weight to make it into a certain weight category. And it's like, here's all the things that I do to make weight for my competition. And when you begin to break down those tactics, a lot of it is very much can be in the realm of disordered eating. Because what they're doing is they're manipulating the water in their day. They're manipulating the types and the macronutrients that they're eating to get a leaner physique, or, to weigh less when it comes time to weigh in. And people get very, as they approach a competition, whether it's a weightlifting competition, bodybuilding, wrestling, they'll start doing like weekly or even daily update videos where they're in front of a mirror, right? They're body checking and they're pinching here and there, and they have pictures of their comparison at the start, and so a lot of that, again, it happens in real life because people really do compete for those things. But then, those of us that don't do that, and you watch the video and then your algorithm's filled with it, is, can be concerning, because then people can pick up the idea that these things are normal to do when in fact they're not normal to do, right? A couple of other things that come to mind are a lot of these like wellness videos that mean well, but underlying is a hidden message of, if you don't eat this, then you're not eating healthy. If you don't eat that, and you don't eat like me. And then people begin to internalize that, saying, well, I don't eat like that. Well, should I eat like that? And then again begins a whole cycle. So there's quite a bit. In my class, we also talk about social media algorithms and, what to do to get rid of some of that stuff. And so, one of the things we talk about that they're actually required to do an assignment on is a relapse prevention plan. A lapse and relapse prevention plan for someone who's in eating disorder recovery. And the big piece of that, because of social media, is what to do in social media. So if you've got that kind of content coming up, flag it as not interested immediately, or block it immediately in order for you not to see it. And that way your algorithm begins to learn, hey, this is not something I want to see. Because otherwise it just keeps giving you more and more and more of it. And that can be very, triggering and dangerous. And it's just about being in tune with what your goal is and what's being portrayed, and if that really does align with you or not.
Wow.
I have a question that I don't know if it's like in this realm, but it makes me think of this. So I had a client before who very much was in this place. I think we talked about it last session, of very stuck in, my body needs to look like it did when I was in high school, even though I'm literally in college. There's been like years that have passed since then. But something that was brought up is going to the gym and seeing influencers like record themselves working out, or even, I think they mentioned something about watching them do like the protein powders or whatever routine, and they were talking about it on camera. And that influencing them to feel like, oh, well, if I'm not doing XYZ that they're doing, then I'm not going to the gym, right? Yeah. Or I need to go more frequently, or I need to buy the products that they do. And so not sure if it like follows like the eating disorder, but it makes me think of even like how influencing it is in that regard. And I know like exercise, gym in general is like a taboo thing and a sensitive thing for a lot of people, but that was so interesting when I heard that, of seeing that made them want to go be more restrictive on themselves and like find their content online and follow that. And that was just like something I never really thought of as the influence of that, but it is so interesting.
Very much, because again, if you think of the purpose of any influencer, regardless of topic, it's to make people change behavior. Or at the very least to keep people entertained and keep them engaged, right? But eventually you stay engaged with an account, you're going to start doing the things that the person is doing. Let's say you follow like a style, like a fashion account, and you're like, oh, I really like that sweater, or I really like those boots, or I really like, and then you're like, where did they find them? And then you go and get them, right? Or you're following a different, like I follow music accounts, and so a lot of it is like, oh, learn how to play this in a different way. And then I go and I try it, right? And that's normal, right? But when you get into the diet or the fitness piece of things, that can be a little bit different. And like you said, there's a lot of people, because it's so common now, and so common that some gyms have actually banned, content creation inside of the gym or videoing inside of the gym.
Wow.
Because so many people are doing it. And you're right, everybody sees it and they're like, should I be doing that? And then they follow them, and then they start seeing, okay, what supplements are they on and what are they taking? And should I be taking it? And the interesting thing is I've worked with clients who begin taking supplements for the right reasons, but then they think more is better, and then they end up with some medical problems as a result of taking too much of something, right? And, we always tell people, unless you have an illness that prevents you from expelling some of these things, you're never going to overdose on any one nutrient from food alone. But you can overdose from stuff from taking supplements, right? And a lot of people do that, and a lot of people, the other thing too is there's a lot of accounts that once you start following them, then you'll start noticing that a big thing of what they do is push supplements, or push an app, or push a specific training program, or they sell their own training programs or diet plans and things like that. And it's very cookie cutter. Right, because these people are in the business, they're not dietitians, a lot of them are not healthcare providers in any way. They don't have any kind of training in that, but they're selling people meal plans and these things. And again, it's very cookie cutter, and I'm sure they try to personalize it as much as they can, but they're not trained in some of these things. If you're working with a otherwise healthy individual who just needs to lose some weight, it might be useful, and there's nothing against that. But once you start working with people that have, other chronic illnesses, you really should be a licensed professional to be able to do that. And in most states, there are laws that protect that. But on the internet, it's kind of free-for-all. It's very unregulated.
Yes, so true. Are there any creators or accounts that you recommend that have a more balanced content?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There's two that come to mind, and I think we've talked about one of them before, but one of them is Find Food Freedom. And she is really good. She calls out all kinds of things. She got famous because she did a reel on TikTok basically exposing the big diet fads. And so she'd talk about hey, keto diet. Keto diet was actually started for epileptic children that had epilepsy, and this is what they did. Intermittent fasting. You're just kind of starving yourself, and you're just eating you get to pick when you want to starve and how long. But at the end of the day, you're eating all your calories in one sitting, within 4 to 8 hours. So she breaks down all the myths around popular diet fads, and talks a lot about intuitive eating. And she's a certified intuitive eating counselor, and she does all these things. Another one that comes to mind, it's called Fork Diet Culture. I like her a lot because she's just really in your face. She does not care what she says. She'll put a video up, for example, she had a video once where she critiques other videos, and she points out, she's a dietitian, and she points out the thing that's wrong in that video. And there was one video she posted of an influencer that was on an all-fruit diet. And visibly looking at the person in the videos, very much well underweight, very much not healthy. And then turns out the influencer eventually passed away from malnutrition.
Oh my gosh.
Which, when we talk about the morbidity and mortality of eating disorders, they're among the highest in the psychiatric diseases, because of the fact that a lot of people starve and go into malnutrition, or they begin to have electrolyte imbalances and then have consequences like cardiac arrest or other things related to those electrolyte imbalances.
That's what I always like about that, because then it's I appreciate that someone's coming in, of course, with a more professional, educational intelligence mindset on it, but then to actually call that out and be hey, they're saying this and I can see where maybe that's appealing or you think that's the thing to do, but here's specifically why not to do that. I think there needs to be more of that, and not just in this area, but in a lot of areas.
So everybody thinks they're mental health counselors too online.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, you bring a really good point too, that, it's important to call it out. And a lot of them really do. Like, they'll take for example, a video of like what I eat in a day. And they're breaking it down, like live saying, like kind of critiquing it, saying, well, that's 100 calories. You could have just eaten a kolache if you really wanted the kolache. Because in their mind, they're saying, like the influencer is saying, I wanted a kolache, but I'm on my, diet, and this is what I ate instead. And she's like, yeah, you could have just eaten the kolache. And make things like that. Another one that really comes to mind is a male dietitian, powerlifter dietitian.
Powerlifter.
And what I love about him, not only does he put a lot of really good content out there if you're lifting or doing things like that, he's very science-based. And he has a newsletter, and he breaks down diet articles, like diet research. So new guidelines come out, or a paper is published on GLP-1s, or a paper is published on intermittent fasting, and he actually breaks it down so that people can understand it in a more approachable way. So I love that about him.
Yeah.
And then for weight loss content, there is actually a physician that I like. His name is Dr. Spencer Naldowski. He is very much, very much fighting obesity stigma in healthcare providers. He's very much, he has a practice for weight loss patients. And he has a dietitian sometimes that he works with. I think her name is Summer, and you could probably find her through him. And he has a practice just kind of helping people meet their weight loss goals, very non-judgmental, very open-minded, very positive of what we like to see when clinicians of any discipline work with people that want to lose weight, and being very sensitive that a lot of people might be wanting to lose weight, but also struggling with disordered eating or an active eating disorder. And he also calls out physicians and other healthcare professionals that body shame or that do things that they're not supposed to patients. And so he's another really good one to follow. I went to a conference in October, and I saw and met him there. And I had already followed him because one of the things I like about him is he's a former college athlete. He's a former Division I wrestler. And so no one like a wrestler knows the cycling up and down of weight loss and things like that. And his brother is an endocrinologist. And so sometimes he'll have his brother on some videos and they'll talk. But another really good account to follow. Very science-based, very healthy, and very much approachable.
Love that. I know, all kinds of resources. I appreciate it. And this kind of is a good segue because we've been talking about a couple different types, right, of just credentials or people, professionals, non-professionals in the field. So if you were to kind of define what a registered dietitian versus a nutritional coach versus an influencer, what do you feel like are big differences for our listeners to kind of know?
Well, I think one big difference is the credentials, right? So we've talked about this before on one of the episodes, and really, to be a nutritionist or a nutrition coach, anybody can do it. You can wake up and just start an account and to do it, and there's no regulation towards it. Yeah. Because most states do not regulate the term nutritionist. They do regulate the term dietitian. So only people who have the title and the training and the whatnot can be a registered dietitian and call themselves that. Right. But a nutritionist can be anybody. And there's so many certifications out there for nutrition or nutrition coaches that a lot of people that have no degree whatsoever, they just have a background in personal training and, of course, personal experience in weight loss and weightlifting and things like that. And they can get the same organizations that issue certifications for personal training, sometimes issue certifications for nutrition. And a lot of people think that that's equivalent to being an RD or being another professional, and it's really not. A lot of that is self-study, and you take a test, and basically if you can open the door, you can get in type of thing. So there's a lot of that that happens, and there's a lot of people that go by the term nutrition coach, right? And again, nutrition coaches and anybody that calls themselves a nutritionist can give general nutrition advice. But once they start working with diagnoses or people that have chronic illnesses, they're technically doing something illegal, because depending on the state that you're working in, only a registered dietitian can provide medical nutrition training, therapy, excuse me. And what is medical nutrition therapy? It is working with patients who have an illness and treating that illness with nutrition interventions.
Right.
Now, the gray area is performance nutrition. Because performance nutrition is not regulated, you're not dealing with an illness, you're dealing with athletes or people that are using nutrition for performance enhancement. There's a lot of ways you can go with that. Of course, there are dietitians who are board certified in sports nutrition and performance nutrition, but there's so many people out there that, and a lot of them have good content, very, very sound, very science-based, very healthy content. And so it's important to look out for some of those things. So what are we looking out for? One, we're looking out for people that are upfront about their credentials. Like, they'll tell you straight up whether or not they're a dietitian, what credentials they do or don't have. Two, you're looking for people that are preaching, and I always tell my students this, I was like, the boring thing is almost always the correct thing.
Yes. Yes.
And I always tell people, like, if it seems boring and if it seems not trendy and edgy, it's probably correct.
Right.
And so you want to know that if they're promoting things that everybody's saying over and over again, it might be a more healthy and sound account to follow. Another thing is if they're pushing anything, if they're pushing meal plans, if they're pushing personal services, if they're pushing supplements, that would be a red flag. Because people that are out there to give, good, healthy content are almost always just doing it for the content piece so that people have access to the information.
Yes.
But the moment they start, a sound bite with, I've got all the answers for you, and all you got to do is buy my book or buy my, training program. And the truth is, nobody has the answers out there. Even us in this room, trained professionals, everything. Yes. We have answers, but not to everything,
Exactly.
And so those are things to be aware of. And then when you start seeing some of those behaviors that I mentioned, extreme weight loss, dieting, and then, comparisons to pre and post, and body checking, and a lot of the things that we warn our patients about, and that are behaviors that could be detrimental to their health. When you start seeing that on those accounts, it's a kind of sign to be, cautious of what they're presenting. And that doesn't mean you block it, doesn't mean you don't see it, but definitely take that with a grain of salt, and definitely understand that if you start feeling some type of way about yourself after viewing the content, maybe it's a good idea not to view that content and find another account, because everyone's on a fitness journey or even just like a self-improvement journey, and a lot of times fitness and health and weight goals are part of that journey, because they're trying to be holistic about their self-improvement, and that's okay. It's just about doing it, in a way that's safe, and working with someone who's trained.
So important. On that note, kind of segueing to our next topic is like some key healthy eating and everyday balance tips. Like, what are some principles that you have seen or taught or hold that are for building like a healthy, that non-restrictive eating relationship with food?
Yeah, and so I love that because, this is one thing we talk about in class, but it's a lot of questions I get asked. You mentioned earlier, like, what are some questions you get asked? A lot of my students ask, well, like, how would I even talk about that to somebody? And I'm like, okay, well, it starts very easy. One, you eat when you're hungry, right? So listening to our hunger cues. And we've talked about before that when you do have an eating disorder or you've engaged in disorder eating patterns for a long time, those hunger cues can change because our body can override them. And it begins listening to your hunger cues. Are you hungry, or are you just eating for a specific reason, right? And then looking at food as very neutral. It's just food. It is nutrients. It is macronutrients. It is vitamins, minerals. It's water. It's fiber. It's not good. It's not bad. There's no morality associated to it. And so sometimes I like to tell people, like, yes, we all strive to eat healthy. We all strive to eat within what we need to for either general health or for an illness that we have, diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, whatever. But at the same time, don't not allow yourself to eat something just because of that. And so I always tell people, you're going to so a lot of, clients will ask, but also people say like, oh, I'm going to this birthday and they're going to have cake and I know I shouldn't have it. And then I try to kind of break that down with them. Well, why don't you think you can have it? When was the last time you had cake? How often do you go to birthdays, and eat cake and things like that? Well, not really that often. And I'm like, okay, well then what's the problem with having a slice? Have a slice of cake. In the grand scheme of things, having one slice of cake for a special occasion isn't going to do anything. Having an entire cake every week by yourself, hiding it, that's different, right? And so, learning that if you want something, go ahead and let yourself have it, right? And there's no need to compensate for it later. You just get back on your routine. There's a lot of people that say, man, I did so good these 5 days, and then on Friday I had this, and it's like, okay, so you had the food. Yes. What about it? Like, just, your next meal, go back, get back on the bandwagon. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Right. But I think it's this mentality of all or nothing. Like, I'm either all in or I'm not doing it right. It's not true. We can be all in and at the same time give ourselves room not to be restrictive. Another thing that I would say is don't listen to people. Like, you know what's best for you and you know what's right for you. Don't listen to your aunt at Christmas who's going to tell you, well, honey, you know what? I tried this and my neighbor did this and we're doing that, and everybody's going to want to give you advice. And, do what's right for you. Do what whatever care plan you've come, to agreement with your provider, do that, right? Don't listen to people. At the end of the day, you're the expert on you and you know what's right for you. And I would say that's another good thing when it comes to avoiding this. And then as far as your relationship with food, again, we talked about the morality of it, but also thinking about it, from a cultural standpoint. There's a lot of people that once they begin a diet, they won't let themselves eat tortillas, or I can't have naan, or I can't, and it's like, why not? Like, we talked about in your meal plan that you can have 3 carbohydrates, so you can have a portion of rice, you can have a portion of beans, and you can have a tortilla. So, so there's also this idea, and we have not gone into it in this podcast. Maybe we could have a completely different podcast about it.
Yeah.
But culture and diet. And because a lot of our practitioners is dietitians, so if we look at if you look at the website of the Commission on Dietetic Registration, who is the national board that gives us our RD credential, and you pull the demographics, about 94% of dietitians are female, and about 88% of them are white. And so all of the diet advice that is being given to patients is coming from one source of culture, right? And so it is very common to hear people say, well, just don't eat that. Eat this. And they're either telling them to eat like that, or they're telling them to eat in a very ethnocentric way that's part of their culture, without taking into consideration someone else's culture and fitting those cultural foods into their meal plans. And so I'd say, if you find yourself avoiding your cultural everyday foods, don't. Find a way to integrate that into your diet or the thing that you want to do and your goals. There's nothing wrong with that. And then finally, avoid using food as a reward. Just avoid it. If you want to have the cupcake, don't wait until you pass your finals to have the cupcake. Just have the cupcake. And, if you're waiting for a special occasion, there's so many other ways that you can reward yourself for reaching a goal. Just don't let food be one of them.
Oh, that one's so hard for me, because I'm like, I'm leaving the house, I'm going to reward myself with a coffee right now. Or I've said to clients too, after an exam, what do you have lined up to celebrate yourself? Oh, I'm going to go have ice cream with my friend. Okay.
It's okay. It's when you get into that pattern of it where it always becomes a reward, because then when it always becomes a reward and then you don't do the thing, then it becomes a punishment.
That part.
So it's like, yes, it's okay to do. We all do it, right? But it's watching out for that pattern where you keep doing it and then you do it and then you do it. And then all of a sudden when you don't do it, then there's a punishment, there's a guilt, there's a shame thing, and then that could create another, spiral of someone. Yeah.
So true.
Yes, it makes me think when you were saying that of like something I see a lot, I don't know if you see a lot, is people using almost like self-care in that aspect too, of especially our college students, of, well, I just don't have time in this semester to do things for me. Like, that's what I can like reward myself afterwards. But then they get to the end and they're like, now I feel horrible, right? And so then it is that like beating myself up, oh, well, I should have done this sooner. And it's like we're just constantly in this thing of like, I feel like I'm not doing enough. Like, I don't have enough time to be able to take care of myself here. But then when I do get to the point where I have time, then I feel bad that I wasn't doing the thing. So it makes me think of like that dynamic of it becomes that punishment factor rather than being like, why can't we take care of ourselves even while we're actively in the semester or doing things? So,
Yeah,
very
for
interesting.
sure.
But my favorite section here that we're getting to is about grocery shopping. And I think something that I would like to hear is, what advice can you give other people? Like, especially if they go to the grocery store and they feel overwhelmed. Like, I've heard stuff of, like, you just stay on the outer perimeters. Like, don't go in the middle where, like, the freezer foods are. And so it's like, I've heard all kinds of things about that. So what is your advice?
So my advice, so I've heard that too, and believe it or not, we've used to have conversations about that when I worked at another job about like, we used to have a whole class on grocery shopping, and it was aimed on like healthy eating and weight loss and whatnot. I even taught one about diabetes and stuff. But what I would say is, in any case, whether you are following it for a health reason, for weight loss, or you're in eating disorder recovery, any of those applies. Go in there with a plan. Make a list. If you have a meal plan, or if you have something that you're following, maybe you don't have a specific meal plan. Maybe you just have a pattern of eating. I'm going to eat a vegetable or a fruit with every meal. I'm going to do this. Have a list. One, it'll save you money, because impulse buying is very real. And so it'll save you money. Have a list and have a plan of what you're going to do. Do some comparisons, right? And so the middle of the grocery section, a lot of dietitians tend to give that same advice, avoiding it because that's where all the processed and frozen foods are. But, in the last 5 to 10 years, we've taken a different light at that advice, because think of it from a socioeconomic standpoint. If you are someone who lives on a fixed income and the stuff in the middle of the grocery store is what you tend to buy because it's what you can afford,
right?
We don't want to shame people for that, but at the same time, we do want to be cognizant that, hey, some of that stuff may not be healthy for you. So what are you eating? Okay, well, can I give you a substitution for that might be cheaper, might be the same price, but it might be a little bit more balanced? Or can I give you something that you can do with fresh food that still meets that, and still satisfies that craving or that food that you wanted? So, number one, again, having a plan going in, have a list of what you want to do. Make sure, just for healthy general eating, make sure there's fruits and vegetables in your grocery cart. And it's whatever you want, whatever you like to eat, whatever's your favorite fruit, vegetable. Sometimes a lot of people will say, it's really hard for me to eat fruits and vegetables like this, just fresh, but I can eat them in a smoothie. Well, great. Go buy frozen ones. Frozen fruits and vegetables are just as, if not more nutrient dense than fresh ones, because they are picked and frozen at the prime peak of ripeness.
Yes.
And so, frozen fruits and vegetables can be a really great way to add fruit and fiber and vegetables into your diet. I tell a lot of people, like, frozen vegetables are great because you can just throw them into whatever you're already cooking, and you're adding your vitamins, your minerals, your fiber into a meal that otherwise wouldn't have it. So a stir fry or something with rice, or you can season them and steam them or air fry them. So there's a lot of things that you can do. A lot of it too is depending on who you are and what you eat and what your goals are. I always tell people have something that's quick and easy that's a go-to, because that way we don't have the excuse, well, I don't have time, or I skipped, a meal because of this. And if it's not common for you to eat, your first meal to be breakfast, that's fine. But I always tell people, put something in your body at the beginning of the day just to kickstart your day, make you feel better, give you some energy.
Right.
And so even if it's just keeping some yogurt on hand and that you can eat quickly on the go, that's a suggestion I give people, is find a couple of items that are grab and goes that meet the healthy things of your meal plan, but that you can put in your grocery cart, and that when you don't have time, you can just grab one of those and you still eat, you're still staying, within your goals and on plan, but at the same time, you're not overwhelmed too much by the choices because when you're on the go and you don't have a plan, then that's when you stop by and I'm going to grab this, and then that turns into two things, and, and you fall off plan. And right now, there's such a big focus on weight loss. For lots of reasons, right? For health reasons, but also just aesthetically, a lot of people are wanting to lose weight to look a certain way. And there's, grocery stores can be overwhelming because, again, there's a comparison of, oh, look, there's that person. They look like they just got out of the gym. What's in their cart? And it's like, maybe stick to what's in your cart, right?
Yes.
But those would be some of the things that I'd say, for good support, recovery or with an illness, and just having those basic building blocks of when you go grocery shopping.
When you were talking about the freezer fruits and vegetables, that was so interesting because I remember when I was in college, I watched a video probably on Instagram or YouTube, and it was like a weight loss influencer in quotations, that was basically on this whole skit about fruit, frozen fruits and vegetables are bad for you. They have more sugar in them. They're not actually nutrient focused. The only way that you're going to be healthy, again in quotations, or make a difference is you need to buy organic everything. And so it's so interesting because in my brain when I heard that, college me was oh. And so even to this day, sometimes when I see it, I'm like, I wonder. But that was so interesting for me to hear, because I was it didn't make any sense, but younger me was just soaking stuff in. But I'm very curious of why that would have been the focus, is organic everything. Have you heard that before?
Oh yeah, there's a big push for organic or grass-fed beef or all these things, right? And one thing we have to remember is that some of these terms are not legally protected by a definition from the FDA. So grass-fed can really be anything. You can keep them in a cage and feed them regular stuff, but you give them grass once a month, and that counts as grass-fed, right? Because there's no legal definition of it that you can hold someone to, right? Other things, there are legal definitions. So when it says sugar-free, it does have to meet a certain definition, or when it says fat-free, it's got to meet a certain. It doesn't mean it's completely fat-free. It just meets the definition that the government allows people to do to put that label on a box of food or something. But there is a big push for people to eat organic, and there's so much debate about organic foods. And really, nutrient-wise, they're about the same. There's no difference in buying organic versus non-organic vegetables. Yeah. It's just about the pesticides or the things, whatever else you're worried about. That is one thing that is the difference. But then again, it really doesn't make a difference at the end of the day. And if you can save some money and still get the nutrition you need just buying normal, regular fruits and vegetables, or even frozen ones. Yes. Sometimes even canned ones, too. There's a lot of, vilifying canned foods because they're high in sodium. And yes, they are high in sodium. But unless you've got a condition where you have to restrict sodium, there's nothing wrong with them. You can also give it, you can dump them out and give them a rinse, and that takes some of the sodium out. Are they still high sodium? Sure. But if you don't need to, you can definitely do. I'll give you an example. Working with an athlete, right? One thing we don't restrict an athlete is sodium because they'll cramp when they're performing. And so what's one of the things that, I talk to athletes about, and they're like, well, shouldn't I avoid canned foods because they're bad? And I was like, no, they're fine. If anything, get a canned of mixed vegetables. Dump out the water. If you want to, rinse it a little bit with water, and then dump that into your ramen. Like, because we were thinking, because he's like, I love ramen. And I'm like, okay, but like real ramen or like instant ramen? They're like, instant ramen. I said, okay, cool, we can work with that.
Yeah.
So which one do you buy? This one. Okay, let me look at the package. Oh, it's got this much carbs. So I need you to add some protein to this, and we need to add some vegetables. And so he brought up like, well, I don't have money for like the organic stuff. Totally okay. You can buy frozen vegetables, dump them in there, and with the heat of the broth, they'll cook up real quick, defrost. Or you can do canned vegetables, half a can, and then save the other half for later. And you've got some vegetables in there. I was like, and then protein. I was like, one of my favorite, easiest and cheapest ways to add protein is frozen shrimp,
What?
or even other frozen meats that are already cooked. They're pre-cooked and everything. You just dump them into whatever you're eating.
Yes.
And so the deli section now has like where you can buy like pre-shredded rotisserie chicken, or you can buy pre-cut or pre-cubed beef or steak or something, or you can buy frozen fajitas or something, and you can add that to a meal, add more protein, and at the end of the day, you're still saving a lot of money, and you're following the goals that you have. So there's a lot of that. But yes, the myth of you have to eat organic or you're not eating healthy is very pervasive, and it's just not true. Like, you can still eat very healthy eating frozen vegetables and fruits.
Love that.
Needed to hear that.
Yes, me too. Same. What would you say are some like go-to staples that support like this eating the way that you want to eat? Like you mentioned, like a carb, protein, and vegetables and fruits, like those three.
Yeah. So I'd say like, a lot of people ask, well, like, is what I'm eating healthy? And how do I know if it is? And so I tend to tell them, like, look down at what you're eating, and is there at least one fruit or vegetable, or two fruits or two vegetables? So maybe it's not one and one, but in what you're eating, is there a substantial amount of fiber? And where does it come from? Well, it comes from beans, it comes from fruits, and it comes from vegetables. So if you look down at your plate and all you see is carbs, then maybe you want to add some fiber.
Yeah.
So all you see is rice or pasta or bread or something.
Yeah.
You may want to add some vegetables to it. And so a lot of people, think like, well, what about like carbs? Well, how much should I have? And so we talk about the amount of carbohydrates, to have that's healthy for someone to have, maybe with diabetes, maybe without. But if you look down, I always tell people a good rule of thumb is for every one carbohydrate you have some protein to go with it and have a vegetable. So ideally, you look down at your plate and you should have a quarter of that plate be your protein, a quarter of that plate be your starch or your carbohydrate, and then half of that plate in some way be fruits and vegetables.
Okay.
And you want to sprinkle on some dairy, sprinkle on some cheese on there, that's fine. Get a little bit of dairy, have some tzatziki sauce, dip your meat into that, so then you have some yogurt, you've got some dairy products in there. Of course, if you're lactose intolerant, you avoid those pieces. But in general, that's what you want. And then drinking water. Drinking water is super important. So I always tell people, like, make sure you're drinking, and we give this as a general guideline, and of course some people need more, some people need less, but drinking half your body weight in ounces is what we recommend to minimum. And a lot of people think like, oh, I'm already drinking my 32 ounce, and when they calculate their body weight and then half that, it's like, whoa, that's like 84 ounces. It's like, yeah, it's like 5-6 bottles of water,
Oh my gosh. So like the number of your weight, divide that in half, and that's the amount of ounces. You should be drinking of water. Oh, wow. I've heard this thing of like, if you drink coffee, then you need to drink extra water.
Yes. Coffee and tea are diuretics, so they'll make you urinate more, and so you're getting rid of your fluid.
Wow. Actually wild.
So, I tell people, like, stick to maybe 1 cup of coffee, and I have my people that are tea drinkers. They love their tea throughout the whole day. Sweet tea, regular.
Yes.
And there's some tea that is caffeine free, and so that's fine to have. So like jasmine tea or like green tea, because that doesn't have a diuretic in it. But other black tea will have a diuretic in it. Coffee naturally is a diuretic. So having extra water when you have those fructose drinks is important.
Okay.
I would just like to say that I very much have been Delulu of like, okay, but if I drink sweet tea, that's just like water with like tea bags.
I mean, it is.
Sugar. But now I'm like, oh, I needed to hear this too. Oh my gosh.
Wow. Transitioning to like kind of the same topic, but more questions. What are some like frequently asked questions you receive?
One of them is, how do I know if I have an eating disorder?
Yeah.
And there are some tools. So National Eating Disorder Association and a couple of other websites have some screening tools that are validated and reliable tools to be used for self-screening, right? And I always tell people, like, if you really truly feel like you have that, go on one of these websites. Some of them have the tool built in, and you can go in and answer the questions. And if it gives you a score, it'll tell you, like, hey, you may want to seek help. Or, no, you're good, but I would watch out for X, Y, Z, right? And so there's some self-screening that you can do. Of course, the best way to find out is to go to a healthcare professional and have them administer an inventory that's designed to screen people, either for all eating disorders. There are inventory tools that just screen for one, anorexia or bulimia or binge eating, or there are some that screen overall and give you a risk score for disordered eating or eating disorders in general. And so I'd say look at those things, but don't necessarily take that on yourself. If you really feel you're struggling, it's best to get help. Go to your PCP, go to a therapist, go to a psychologist, someone that can diagnose you or that can send you to someone who can. So that is one question I get, is how do I know? And so we'll go through some of the criteria that are like, well, this is just regular, I hate to say regular disordered eating versus an eating disorder, but this is generally what we would consider disordered eating behaviors. And then this is when it crosses the line into becoming an eating disorder, when it persists more than 2 weeks, when you do a binging and a purging cycle more than X number of times for X number of months or weeks. And of course, it's all based on that DSM-5 criteria. But even before that, a lot of people ask, well, is this behavior, like, can this lead to an eating disorder? I was like, well, right now, no. But depending on what that behavior and pattern looks like in a month or two, maybe it can, right?
Yes.
So that's one question I get. Another question I get is, how much does my home environment contribute to an eating disorder, or just people's home environment in general? And I'd say quite a bit. Social and psychological factors are the number one contributors to eating disorders. And when we look at social factors, family dynamics is super important.
Yeah.
What type of family you come from, how they talk about food, how they talk about bodies, how they make you feel about your own body and about the choices you make really do matter when we're talking about eating disorder risk. And so I tell people, if you're in a dynamic or a family environment where it's chaotic or where it's this and that or traumatic or even abusive, I'm like, find a way to get help when you're in that environment. Is it better to step away? Can you step away?
Right.
Some people can't.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, now we have to learn how to navigate that environment so that it's safe for you and so that you feel empowered to make choices for yourself without feeling the shame that you feel from family members. Because, a lot of times, and I'll give you an example, in working with a client, they developed an eating disorder because their mother had like agoraphobia, like social anxiety of going out of the house. So she wanted them to stay in the house all of the time with them. And this was an adult. Yeah. And they were like, well, like, I couldn't even date. I couldn't go out with friends. And by the end of this, like, the mother's disorder had taken on such a toll with that person that they only had like one friend, and even then the mother made him feel guilty for wanting to leave the house and spend time with that friend. And of course, when they were in the house, what were they doing? Well, they were like eating and they were like doing all these other things. Right. And that's fine to support a family member, but at the same time, like, we've got to remember ourselves too. Yeah. You're no good to somebody if you're not you yourself taking care of yourself. So that self-care piece we talked about earlier. And then finally, another question I get is, if I know that I have an eating disorder, and maybe I've been diagnosed in the past, and I kind of walked away from treatment, how do I get back on? Like, how do I make sure that I can get help? And I always tell people is pick back where you left back, pick up where you left off. Go back and see the therapist that you were avoided. Go back and see your doctor. And if those individuals didn't work for you, find new ones. There's so many resources out there.
Right.
And there's even a lot of places where you can at least do an initial session for free. And they can point you in the right direction to resources depending on what you have available to you. If you have insurance, if you don't,
Right.
And what you're able to afford and not able to afford. But there's a lot of places where people can start. A lot of questions I get to are like, I've had an eating disorder and I've relapsed, And so, definitely get back into treatment. But one of the things we emphasize is when you're coming out of treatment, a really good thing to have is a relapse prevention plan. And it's like, what does that look like? Who is your social support? Who are you going to call? What is the thing that you can work with, that you can do to make sure that you stay away from those behaviors? Is it writing a note to yourself every day? Is it journaling? Is it, going to see a therapist, once a quarter or once a month, once you're in, remission, to prevent that relapse? And then who's your social support? Who are you going to talk to?
Right.
Who's going to make sure that they check in on you? And all those things are really important. So social support cannot be understated in this.
Yes, I appreciate that you highlighted that. And I think, too, something as we start wrapping up here that I would love to hear if you have any on hand, because you've already given so many good resources of like social media professionals and their content to follow. But are there any specific for like thinking of our Denton, Dallas, Houston campuses, any local resources in any of those areas that we can also maybe put in the description for this episode and for students to know if they need to access it?
There is one center, and I don't work for them. I'm not paid by them. But there is a center called the Eating Recovery Center. And there's one here in Houston, and they're a nationwide company. So you'll find them in major cities. There's also here in Houston, we have the Menninger Clinic, who has a specific eating disorder program. Texas Children's across the street can see adolescents up to a certain age. So even if you're in college, you're still considered an adolescent if you were following care with them prior to. So they'll still see eating disorders there as well. But depending on where you live, you can search for resources, but a really good place to search is like the provider resources on the National Eating Disorder Association website, or any credible eating disorder body will have sometimes a registry of providers or places that you can go in the city that you live in. Or even if you don't live in that city, if you live close by.
Right.
Because what do you do if you're in a rural area and there's barely a clinic, there's barely an ER, there might be a small hospital out in a rural area, but guarantee there's no one that specializes in eating disorders in that area. But where's the closest place you can go to?
Right.
And then reaching out to your healthcare providers as well for more resources. But those are some I can think of at the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And with that, let's wrap up this episode. I want to thank you so much for coming and closing up this series. I had a lot of fun and learned so much. I know last time we organically got a quote at the end of the episode, but I'm curious if there's a mantra that you have with your own relationship with food or eating that helps you keep it in perspective to take care of yourself, or maybe just to keep your values in mind whenever you are teaching or just showing up for yourself.
Yeah, one of the things I like to keep in mind is, whatever it is, whether it's food or an activity or something, but if it brings me joy, I want to keep doing it.
Yes.
And so staying in, connection to that with whatever it is I'm doing is really important. So if it's something that brings you joy, do more of it, right? 2, it's never too late to start, right? You know, whether that's on the pathway to recovery or starting the pathway, you know, to getting help, or even if you're trying to reach a weight loss goal and you don't know where to start, it really is never too late to start. And that goes for anything, you know, whether you want to learn to play an instrument, you want to go back to school and get a degree or an education, whatever it is, it's never too late to start. And then another one I like to live by is mistakes are okay.
Yes.
Perfectionism is actually one of the risk factors, psychological risk factors for eating disorder when people are very perfectionistic. And so I tend to be very perfectionistic just because of who I am, and dietitians in general, we're like that. But I always try to tell myself, it's okay if I make a mistake.
Yes.
I can start over again. And in very rare cases, is my mistake going to kill me or kill anybody else? Like, the mistakes that we make every day are not life and death mistakes, right? So it's okay to make a mistake. Admit you made a mistake. If you've got to make amends for that mistake, make the amends and move forward. It's when we stay silent and when we avoid that, then that can spiral and snowball into something else. So being okay with mistakes, taking accountability, and moving forward are really important.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I needed to hear that too. And thank you all so much for like all the information you give and your time and like sitting down and talking with us. We appreciate it so much.
And I definitely want to do the culture and diet.
Oh, that would be a really fun one. I could even, get us to have another guest with us.
Yes.
That would be so fun. Okay, coming soon.
Coming soon. Stay tuned. On that note, also stay tuned for our next episode, The Hustle Trap, when ambition leads to burnout. Yes, so super excited about that one. But again, thank you again, Ramiro.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Anytime.
it.
Pleasure.
All right. Well, take care, wonderful listeners.
Bye.
Bye.